very hopeful. And good afternoon to all who have joined us. And before we begin, I want to recognize the other members who are here. Congressman Mark Vesey of Texas and Congressman Mike Quigley of Illinois. And then I'm very grateful that we have Daphne Rand, the Assistant Secretary for Human Rights of the State Department. And then we're particularly fortunate to have all the way from Kentucky, Congressman Andy Harris. So, Congressman, thank you for being here. And today we're here to discuss the country in the middle of Europe, often overlooked in the context of war criminal Putin's war in Ukraine. Neighboring Belarus, still controlled by the dictator Alyaksandr Lukashenka. After 30 years and many false elections, his relationship with war criminal Vladimir Putin is closer than ever. It was Putin who helped him maintain power in the face of the popular mass protest of 2020. Lukashenka is returning the favor by allowing Belarus to be used as a staging ground for attacks on Ukraine and a space to commit other crimes, such as the invading of and the kidnapping of Ukrainian children who've been kidnapped from their homes, which is inconceivable in the 21st century that something like that could occur. Belarus is now, but it was actually in the tradition of what Hitler did with the children of Poland, and so the similarities, sadly, are very clear. Belarus is now effectively controlled by Putin. Lukashenko traded its sovereignty to protect his own interest. It's essential that we take action and precautions accordingly. This means treating Belarus and Russia the same for sanctions purposes and making sure Russia can't use Belarus as a loophole to avoid sanctions. Finally, Belarusians have suffered greatly under Lukashenko, and I want to acknowledge the bravery and dedication of those fighting for a free and democratic Belarus and sovereignty, and for the release of political prisoners. The actual elected president, Svetlana Alyaksandrovna, is courageous in her efforts to promote freedom and democracy, and it's particularly significant the country of Lithuania is in the forefront of working to promote freedom and democracy for their next-door neighbor. These patriots are at a forefront of these calls for accountability for Lukashenko, at great risk to themselves, whether still in Belarus or abroad. I appreciate the ranking member of the Commission, Steve Cohen, for recommending the Helsinki Commission hold this hearing and for being a constant bipartisan partner this Congress. And he'll be here in a few minutes. He's got another schedule issue. But the Helsinki Commission functions best when it's bipartisan. And U.S. foreign policy issues should be, as much as we can, bipartisan. Steve and I don't agree on much domestically, but when it comes to foreign policy, we are in agreement that dictators must be deterred and the United States should support freedom around the world. Thank you, Steve, when he comes. With that, I want to introduce our witnesses for the day who know very well the dangers of the Russia-Belarus alliance. First, we hear from Matvey Kupraychik, who is a public representative for the Belarusian organization Belpan. And I'm so grateful to have the acting foreign minister of the great country, of liberated great country of Lithuania. I mean, who, after decades, back on track. God bless you. And that is Gabrielis Landsbergis. And then we're grateful to have Katerina Rashevska, a legal expert from the Ukrainian organization Regional Center for Human Rights. And with three extraordinary individuals, if there are any members of the panel who would like to make an opening statement, if not, we will proceed right away. And I can't wait for Congressman Cohen to get here. And so, but as we proceed, I'd like to, again, thank each of you for coming, and we will begin with the Honorable Kupraychik.
Dear Mr. Chairman, members of audience, thank you for the opportunity to participate in the hearing on Belarus at the U.S. Helsinki Commission. The Belpol organization is engaged in documenting the crimes of Lukashenko's regime, including political repression, facts of corruption, complicity in the Russian aggression in Ukraine, and others. We closely cooperate with the Office of Foreign Assets Control of the US Department of the Treasury. Thanks to the documents handed over by the Belpol organization, the USA, European Union countries, and other democratic states imposed sanctions on 26 enterprises in Belarus and Russia. I would like to emphasize that dictator Lukashenko is not a legitimate president of Belarus. In 2020, he lost the election to Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, but he falsified the results of the voting and illegal retained power by armed means, with the help of large-scale repressions. Our organization has received documents confirming that the Lukashenko regime has already launched a mechanism of falsification of the so-called presidential election in Belarus in 2025. Belpol has prepared a report for the world community on the system of illegal retention of power by Lukashenko regime, falsification of previous election campaigns, and the upcoming so-called presidential election in 2025. I'm submitting this report to my testimony. Here is our report, and if you, when you read that report, if you need the attachments of that, you can write the message to our email, and we send the attachments to you. Thank you. When world politicians talk about Russia, main allies in the war against Ukraine, they name Iran, North Korea, China, but for some reason they forget about the dictator Lukashenko. Lukashenko's regime is not included in the global axis of evil. Also, in fact, it plays a significant role in it. Without the involvement of dictator Lukashenko, Putin would not have been able to carry out a large-scale invasion of Ukraine. The fighting would have been more localized. Now Lukashenko is trying to play the role of a peacemaker and negotiator, but in reality, he continues to assist in Russian aggression. The Belpol organization has received many documents confirming that Lukashenko's regime is increasing military supplies to Russia. Thus, only the enterprises subordinated to the State Military Industrial Committee of Belarus shipped military goods worth $422 million to Russia in 2023. In the first 8 months of 2024, the same enterprises shipped military goods worth $459 million to Russia. That is more than in the whole of the 2023 year. And this is only a part of military supplies from Belarus as exports of military goods to Russia, also made by enterprises that are not part of the State Military Industrial Committee, including private firms. Here are some more figures. In 2023-2024, Lukashenko's regime supplied Russia with 4.5 million sets of parts for 122 millimeters caliber rockets for Grad MLRS, worth $260 million. In 2023, about 800 sets of electronical optical units for sights and control system for tanks and armored vehicles were shipped from Belarus to Russia. In 2024, more than 1,500 such systems have already been shipped. Contracts for the shipment of military goods to the Russian Federation are concluded for 2025 and 2026. For this reason, we should impose more sanctions against individuals and enterprises that support Russian aggression against Ukraine. And one more important piece of information. On 6 December, tomorrow, in Minsk, Lukashenko should sign a treaty between Russia and Belarus on security guarantees within the framework of the Union State. Russia concluded a similar treaty with North Korea this year. The organization Belpol received the text of this treaty. This agreement will allow Russia to place new military bases and military contingents on the territory of Belarus. In addition, Belarusian citizens can be sent to the war with Ukraine to protect the territorial integrity of Russia. For that reason, we need to know that we need do more sanctions, and we need to do faster that sanctions. Therefore, we cannot trust dictator Lukashenko. We should increase the sanctions pressure on him. According to the information recited by the organization Belpol, international economic sanctions at present particularly do not affect the standard of living of ordinary Belarusians. But sanctions have a negative impact on the military supplies. Sanctions are breaking up supply chains. Sanctions increase the production time of military products. Sanctions reduce the profitability of its production. Sanctions reduce the output of military goods for Russia. Sanctions make it impossible to purchase and pay for individual components. However, the Lukashenko regime takes measures to circumvent the sanctions. For example, information in customs documents is forged. So-called spacer firms are created right now. For example, the organization Belpol found out that the Chinese spacer firm Shenzhen 5G High-Tech Innovation buys companies for tanks sized for Chinese manufacturers and supplies them to the Belarusian factory Peleng. The firm Shenzhen 5G High-Tech Innovation is created and managed by citizens of Belarus who previously worked at Belarusian military plants. That is, Chinese manufacturers formally do not export these military goods to Belarus, but actually do it so through the firm Shenzhen 5G High-Tech Innovation. Many people think that the Belarusian people have come to terms with the rule of Lukashenko's regime, as there are no protests in Belarus now. But it's not so. Now protests are impossible because of large-scale repression. In Belarus, people are imprisoned, even for verbal criticism of the regime. But Belarusians haven't given up. They act underground. They send information about the regime's crimes to Belarusian democratic organizations. Thanks to the help of ordinary Belarusians, our organization Belpol receives information and documents which I mentioned above. We call for increased sanctions pressure on Lukashenko's criminal regime. Belpol and other Belarusian democratic organizations will provide the necessary assistance. But at the same time, we need your help in bringing dictator Lukashenko to justice. Thank you for your attention. I am ready to answer the questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kuprichak. And we're so grateful to have the acting foreign minister of the extraordinary nation of Lithuania, and we're so grateful to have Mr. Landsbergis.
Thank you so much, distinguished chair, distinguished members of Congress, dear colleagues. I have a chance to present an overview, a tiny overview of the activities that we observe that are taking place in Belarus, the way that they affect the regional security in view of the war against Ukraine, of Russia's war against Ukraine. But I'd like to stress that Belarusian aggressive activity did not start on 2022. I would mark that after the stolen election in 2020, when a big part of Belarusian opposition was forced to flee Belarus and to find refuge either in Lithuania or in Poland, this is where the change really began. And I would mark that the first event that really points out to the changed behavior of the regime was in 2021, when the civilian air flight traveling from Athens to Vilnius was hijacked in the airspace of Belarus in order to take two Belarusian opposition members prisoner. There was a false report of a bomb if a plane were to land in Vilnius, so the plane was forced to land in Minsk. It landed, people were apprehended, and then the rest of them were let go. So we had a clear act of state terrorism employed against Belarusian people, against Lithuanian people. There were U.S. citizens. There were, half of Europe was represented in that plane. Afterwards, Lukashenko, and illegitimate, that was said, a legitimate dictator, promised that he will, in order to continue to change the policy of Europe, he will employ different hybrid measures. He said that publicly. And out of those measures, he said that now, up until now, Belarus was able to stop the flows of migrants to European borders. But he said that he won't be able to do that any longer. And not so long time after he made that statement public, we started seeing hundreds of people from Iraq and Northern Africa, Middle East, arriving at the border of Lithuania, and at the gunpoint, most of them at the gunpoint, being pushed through the border of my country. They were told false stories that the country that they are finding on there is actually, it could be Germany, it could be Sweden. They were not given maps, they were not given instructions, anything else. They were just forced through the border. At one point, there were more than 20,000 people in Belarus that were flown in from Kurdistan in Iraq into Belarus, selling them tickets and promise of European passage into Europe, and then pushed to the border of Europe. That was an operation organized with the help of Belarusian intelligence agencies, police, in order to bring those people from Middle East to European border. We called it a hybrid attack. We called it a weaponized migration. And therefore, we were forced to defend not just my country, but also the European border. Afterwards, most of the events were presented. We know how it went. Belarus facilitated the Russian attack against Ukraine, and as colleague just mentioned, definitely the attack could have been quite different if Belarus has not participated in that manner that it did. Later on, after the initial attack, and when it was repelled and was mostly focused in eastern part of Ukraine, eastern and southern part of Ukraine, the activities did not cease. Belarus provides a space for Russian troops training. It accepted Russian nuclear weapons, and as far as we know, they're stationed in Belarus, actually changing the security situation of the whole region. What was mentioned, Belarus is #1 country helping Russia avoid sanctions. Therefore, it's imperative that we align the sanctions the ones that are imposed on Russia with the ones that are imposed on Belarus. We cannot allow Belarus to be just one station before everything that is sanctioned being sent further down. What I'd like to stress, a couple of additional things, and Mr. Chair, you've mentioned the kidnapping of children. We have very specific information that children from the occupied areas in Ukraine have been sent to Belarusian hospitals, health centers for retraining. We gathered the information and we passed that to international justice system, so that, because the ones that have been targeted by the ICC in Russia, apart from Putin, are the ones who are dealing with kidnapping of children. And since Belarus is complicit in this crime, we believe that they should be joined in, not just in a political condemnation, but in actual criminal investigation as to their action. And lastly, I wanted to tell one short story. When there was Wagner activity, and Chair, you definitely remember when Wagner troops decided to march onto Moscow, and they were stopped. Later on, they were sent to Belarus. And part of them were training and stationed just by the border of my country. Actually, the closest camp where Wagner troops were stationed were just 5-7 kilometers away from my border. You know what's the saddest thing here? Is because on the other side on our side of the border, we have healthcare centers which were treating Ukrainian soldiers. And during the night or during the day, they would hear Wagner troops training on the other side of the border, because that's so close. They would hear the same people that they had to fight in Ukraine being brought to Lithuania while they were treated there. So my point is, distinguished Congressman, is that Lithuania is directly affected by the war in Ukraine and by Belarusian activities that happened before the war, during the war, and currently still do take place. And very, very last, Lukashenko, what he does, and that's not the first time, next year he will have what he will call the election, actually reappointment of himself. Usually he uses this opportunity as to reestablish the relationship with whoever he can. I'm sure that he will reach out. He will reach out to European countries, he will reach out maybe even to US, wherever, via back channels. We cannot allow him to be legitimized in that manner. We have to tell them that we will withstand him. Democracies will withstand an authoritarian. We will continue with sanctions. We will continue with pressure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Foreign Minister Landsbergis. Yes, and you're very clear in your statements and so helpful. And we're so fortunate to have, indeed, Katerina Rashevska, and we appreciate you being an expert from the Regional Center for Human Rights.
Chairman Wilson, distinguished members of the Helsinki Commission, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Many who support Ukraine understand that Russia has taken more than 19,000 Ukrainian children. But there is less public awareness of the role of Belarus in this displacement, indoctrination, and militarization of Ukrainian children too. The Lukashenko regime is teaching Ukrainian children to aspire to die for the country that is committing atrocities against them. This is part and parcel of the global Russian state policy of eradicating Ukrainian national identity through the war of aggression. Unfortunately, the role of the Belarusian regime in aiding and abetting this policy has not received an adequate attention. My testimony draws on a year of research and advocacy work of the Regional Center for Human Rights, Freedom House, and Human Rights Center Zmina in partnership with independent Belarusian organizations. We identified 2,219 Ukrainian children between the ages of 5 and 17 who were taken and then re-educated in 18 institutions in Belarus. Most of these children are orphans, children deprived of parental care, children with disabilities, and those living in difficult conditions. We know that some parents were coerced into giving the so-called consent to get these children to Belarus because they were threatened to be deprived of parental care rights or their property. Other parents who just survived all these atrocities and ongoing war believed that this transfer to Belarus is the only way to save their child's life. None of the parents gave their consent to what occurred inside the re-education camps. The curriculum in these institutions just has a strong ideological component featuring Russian and post-Soviet propaganda narratives. Ukrainian children are forbidden to express their national identity, also to speak Ukrainian language. Their Ukrainian citizenship is just not recognized. Perhaps the most horrific things these children experienced in Belarus was militarization. Ukrainian children were trained by Belarusian officers who were involved in violent crackdowns on protesters in August 2020. The children also participated in hand-to-hand combat trainings with representatives of the Belarusian special forces. We now see that some Ukrainian children aspire to enter Russian military schools and to defend their new motherland, Russia. In 2021, Alyaksandr Lukashenka personally laid the foundation for this scheme as a part of a coordinated policy with the Russian Federation through the Union State. The Union State is a supranational agreement between two countries that actually serves like major sanction loopholes to avoid all pressure, all restrictions, especially on the issue of Ukraine's children. In 2022 and 2023, the Union States allocated over $300 for the displacement of Ukrainian children in Belarus, which resulted in more than 20 re-education campaigns. This scheme of displacing Ukrainian children goes all the way to the top to include Vladimir Putin, Alyaksandr Lukashenko, as well as Dmitry Mezintsev, the State Secretary for the Union State, and Mikhail Mishustin, Russia's Prime Minister. It also includes directors of educational institutions and also these camps, as well as representatives of Russian and Belarusian Gongos and local administrations. Political indoctrination and militarized re-education of Ukrainian children in Russia and in Belarus are systematic and widespread, bearing the elements of a separate crime against humanity under the Rome Statute, discriminatory persecution. This conclusion highlights the gravity of the crimes and underscores the need for a decisive reaction from the United States and from the international community. We need more individual and harmonized sectoral sanctions. In this context, we welcome recent restrictions against 5 new persons involved in the deportation of Ukrainian children. We need also the issuance of new arrest warrants against perpetrators from Belarus who were involved in the process to organize all these re-education campaigns in the territory of Belarus. We also need that the number of children who may be eligible for the reparation under any future compensation mechanism was expanded. We look to the United States as the members of the International Coalition for the Return of Ukrainian Children to assist our country, Ukraine, to establish a unified legal mechanism for repatriation of Ukrainian children, because unfortunately, approximately 90% of all deported children remain under Russian control. We also need to elaborate on the basis of previous experience of other countries, the national system of rehabilitation and reintegration, because these children are really very traumatized. We will fight to return Ukrainian children back to their homes because it is not only their right, but a passport to a better future for these children and for Ukraine. Distinguished members, also Ranking Member Cohen, I am persuaded that if we are to achieve true peace in Ukraine, we must begin with our children. Having a country that is truly fit for children doesn't simply imply the absence of war. It means having a safe country where every child can grow to adulthood in peace, dignity, and safety without constant threat from neighboring states. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rashevska. And we are now going to begin with 5 minutes by each person who's here on the commission. And we've been joined by the Most High Honorable Vice Commissioner, Steve Cohen from the Tennessee. I'm very grateful. In fact, after my 5 minutes, I'm going to turn it over to him. I have Steve has arranged that I have a meeting with Elon Musk. And so I
loan him some money.
No, so hey, but again, thank you, Ms. Rashevska. It's just horrifying to think of, and my 5 minutes begins now. And so, but truly, it was impressive. I was there in Kyiv and met where persons had rescued some children who had been kidnapped. And who would imagine here in the 21st century, as I mentioned, that you would have kidnapping of children for Russification or whatever they want to call it, in the exact tradition of Adolf Hitler of kidnapping children in Poland to Germanize, Nazify. And so to have this reliving is just, to me, in the 21st century shouldn't be. And that's why it's so encouraging to have you here today. And Foreign Minister Landsbergis, I am so happy that you're here. And indeed, something so important that you mentioned, and that is that Lukashenko has announced that he has several dozen Russian nuclear weapons in Belarus. How does that change the dynamics? What should we do?
Well, thanks so much. I mean, probably we have to, at this stage, we have to understand that Belarus is an extension of Russia's military arm. Mm-hmm. So when we're thinking about the need to defend NATO's eastern flank from Russia, we have to understand that Russia is way closer than we've imagined.
Yes.
Because it actually operates freely in the whole territory of Belarus. With its arms, when it comes to Ukraine, we've seen with very fast troop movement. When we seen Wagner was back from almost, a couple of hundred kilometers from Moscow. They were on Lithuanian border in 8 hours. That's how fast you can move within Russia and Belarus. So the request from us is take into account that Belarus is a major security issue for the region. And when you talk about the needs of our region, it needs to be reinforced. It needs to be reinforced with more NATO troops, with more equipment, because we are in a dangerous region.
And indeed, Foreign Minister, as you indicate, the Russian military in Belarus, that it's really an extension so far. But hey, it also fits into something else. Mr. Putin claims that Ukraine doesn't exist. As he's trying to recreate the Soviet Union, I wonder if the people in Belarus understand that means one day they won't exist too, as we've already seen with the Russian occupations continuous of Transnistria in Moldova and the South Ossetia and Abkhazia and the Republic of Georgia, maintaining troops in Armenia. The people of Belarus should understand that if one former republic doesn't exist, all ultimately would be the goal not to exist. With that in mind, again, the kidnapping and Russification of the children is so horrific. And so any further comments you'd like to make, Ms. Reshka?
So maybe I would like to demonstrate some photos just
yeah.
in order to support what I will tell. So this is the militarization of Ukrainian children made by the Russian Federation with assistance of Belarusian agents. Wow. So Ukrainian kids are just turned into the enemies of their proper nations. In order to fulfill this aim, the Russian Federation, together with Belarus, built the whole system just under our noses to raise children as soldiers. They do it through formal and informal education. That is why, for us, it's really important to recognize this indoctrination and militarization of education as a separate crime against humanity, and of course, to punish all guilty persons. Because, this is not only the threat to Ukraine, but to global peace and security, because this is a clear sign that Russia, as well as Belarus, they are not planning to stop this war. They are preparing a new war of aggression.
Thank you so much. And indeed, it is the ultimate crime against humanity to kidnap children and deny them their heritage. Mr. Kuprechek, indeed, the foreign minister has mentioned about the Russian military presence in Belarus. What is the extent of the presence there?
So I just want to add some information about nuclear weapon in Belarus. Belpol organization just a few weeks ago published our investigation about tactical nuclear weapon in Belarus. Right now, we can say that Lukashenko do not have any nuclear weapon in Belarus. But tomorrow, Putin and Lukashenko signed a new document about Union State, and we have information that in the second part of 2025 and beginning of 2026, Putin transfer tactical nuclear weapon in Belarus. And in a few days, we will publish information about that military base, and Putin prepare Belarus to take a nuclear weapon. That's the first. The second, that document, which Lukashenko and Putin will sign tomorrow, gives Putin opportunity to transfer military bases from Russia to Belarus territory. And in the same time, that document gives Putin opportunity to send Belarusian troops to the Ukraine. Right now, in the same time, we have information that in Belarus right now, Wagner troops, we have just only near 300 of Wagner troops, and that troops are trained Belarusian militaries, and that's all. So,
thank you so much. And indeed, it's prescient on the part of Congressman Cohen. He's the person who wanted to have this hearing, and he's ahead of the curve. That this is the day before just absurd agreements are reached, or actually, however you want to call it, enforced. And so I'm going to, again, thank Congressman Cohen for his leadership. I want to thank all three of you for being here, and I regret I have to run. But boy, are we in good hands with Congressman Steve Cohen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and like a politician, you are running. We do that. I thank you all for being here. I've visited Belarus on a couple of occasions and met with Lukashenka, and he's a man who likes power, and he's not going to give it up. He has no regard for the law. He has regard for his own power and his own, really an empire which he wants to have. But he knows he's weak, and he knew he was to be the vassal of Putin. He had no choice but to give in to Putin, because Putin would have taken over Belarus. So he made his deal with the devil. It's disturbing that he's taken these children. Ms. Rashevska has the children in Belarus, they were kidnapped by the Russians and then transferred to Belarus, is that correct?
So these children, they were displaced. Unfortunately, we are not able to prove that all children were just kidnapped, but we have at least 3 groups of children orphans and children deprived of parental care. This is approximately 150 kids who were really kidnapped, who were really abducted, because Ukraine, as a state who is responsible for these children, who is parents patria, has not given its consent to this transfer. In other cases, it was really difficult to confirm or deny the not coerced nature of this consent, because unfortunately mostly these kids and their parents, they still be in occupied territories, and that is why to contact these people and to ask them whether these children were returned or they were not returned, this is just to pose these people under the risk to be persecuted by the Russian Federation. But we are really persuaded that the Belarusian regime is guilty just because these children were re-educated, just because these children were indoctrinated. And several days ago, the new group of children orphans from the occupied Donetsk region, this is 38 orphans and children deprived of parental care, they were sent to Belarus, but the logistics of this transfer was totally new and unique. Firstly, these children were sent to Moscow, then these children were sent to Minsk, then to Vitebsk, and that is why we are not sure that all children would be returned, especially because of their status. These children are orphans, no one is looking for them, and unfortunately Belarus as well as Russia, they don't allow access of any independent monitoring mission to the process of this transfer. So it is really difficult to just give a short answer to your question, but this is a challenge for Ukraine just to identify the logistics of this transfer and also the children who were allegedly kidnapped.
But they would have come from eastern Ukraine, is that not correct?
Yes.
And Moscow and Minsk, and then are they being trained to be military, to be in soldiers, or just being in the military to be taught to take orders and adapt to being Belarusian?
This is a difference between Russia and Belarus, because while the Russian Federation is trying to make from these children loyal Russian patriots and future soldiers, Belarus is only assisting the Russian Federation to achieve this goal. That is why we didn't document cases where, for example, these children were subjected to have Belarusian passports or Belarusian documents, or these children were transferred to Belarusian families for adoption, like it was with Ukrainian children deported to Russia. And that is why we should qualify as a crime to Belarusian representatives, because they are not involved in the crime of deportation, but they're involved in the crime against humanity. So their role is a little bit different than the role of Russians, but it still be an international crime.
To the best of your knowledge, have any of these Ukrainian children been sent into the battlefield on behalf of Russia?
We documented at least 27 children who were firstly sent to Belarus, then they were returned, then they were sent to Russia, and the fate of these children is unknown. So we are not sure that Belarus is not used as some point in order just to organize the process of the final deportation of these children to Russia. For example, to use this time in order to prepare these children, to find for them Russian foster families, and so on and so forth. So this is also the unique role of this stay in Belarus for these children.
Thank you very much. I'm going to yield to Mr. Quigley from Illinois.
Thank you, Chair. Could you go just a little deeper dive, sir, into, you talked about Belarus helping Russia evade sanctions. Can you give some examples and details on that?
Sure. Oh, okay, it's working. I can give you an example. For at least a couple of years, there was a huge disparity between the sanctions that were imposed on Russia and Belarus. That means that there were goods that you could not export to Russia, but you still could export to Belarus. And Lithuania has been actively advocating so that these sanctions would be aligned. And one of the reasons why we've advocated, because most of the goods that would go to Belarus go through Lithuania because of our logistical location. You know, the best roads, the best railroads, the best connections go through my country. That's the, you know, the thing that we got from the Soviet Union. So that we could monitor the goods that cross the border into Belarus, and in certain goods we could monitor that they appear further down. So I will leave a report of dual-use goods, of the goods that we would find later that were transferred to Belarus, but we would find them in Russia-produced military equipment that is found in the field in Ukraine. But one anecdote is that for a very long time, there was an ability to export luxury cars to Belarus, but not to Russia. And most of the modern luxury cars, they do have a GPS installed. So that means that whenever the car is turned on for the first time, it sends a location where it's turned on. So you would have luxury cars that are being exported to Belarus, to Minsk, but then for the first time they are turned on, not in Minsk, but in Moscow.
So, I can just give some examples how Belarus helps Russia to evade the sanctions. Our organization are specialized in that question, and right now we know that Lukashenko's regime helps Russia to fight against Ukraine totally. More than 84% of export of the Ministry of Industrial of the Republic of Belarus goes to the Russia. Right now, 84%. It's like a big number. And in the same time, we know that, an example, Belarusian state industrial complex helps to produce Russia some military goods, like sights for tanks, for mortars, for artillery, and so on. And Lukashenko's regime buys some equipment through the China, and after that they collect that sites and so on, and after that they send it to the Russia, and Russia use it in the battlefield and so on. In the same time, we know that European Union 14th sanction package works really well, and that package gives that package. Because of that package, Lukashenko lost more than $1 billion just on the half of the 2024 year, and it's like a really good success of the work, and we can show how sanctions works. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to talk with you about Wagner, because we haven't heard that much about them in the news lately. Not since the, I'm not going to call it the untimely death, but the death of their leader. How would you characterize the activities of Russia's Wagner group in Belarus today? And do you think that they currently pose any sorts of threats, particularly with everything that's happening in Ukraine right now? Either, yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so our organization just collect the data that right now in Belarus we just have not more than 300 troops of Wagner, and that troops are training Belarusian military forces because they have a lot of experience by the Ukrainian by the participating in the Ukrainian war. So,
If I may. So after the unsuccessful coup of Wagner, most of the private mercenary, whatever armies, they were incorporated into the general army structure of Russia. Because I believe that there was a fear that, you know, that this could be repeated. You know, the actions of Wagner could be repeated. Certain activity of Wagner, again, under different names, but the same leadership has retained some activity in Central African states. This is where we monitor them still actively operating. The same people, but when it comes to Ukraine, or Belarus, the picture has changed dramatically. Probably the main lesson out of the whole situation, of the turmoil, let's call it that way, I think, at least for us and for the security of the region, was the speed of the development of events. Because most of the people in the European theater were caught off guard as to how fast the events were developing. So when we talk about the security, and when we say that we have eyes in Russia, when we say that we have eyes in Belarus, and we do, we see movement. Unfortunately, this does not count for stray units. This does not count for immediate action when the decision is being made on point, and then the troop movement begins. So it should serve as a lesson as to how fast we can come from a situation which is manageable and not pose a security to NATO, and suddenly it does in 8 hours later. So this is the concept, and when we're talking about the increased need of security for eastern flank, this is the exact reason why, because the countries are unstable basically, and they do not necessarily manage the threats to us the way that we think that they might.
How significant do you think it is? I know that one of the Belarus officials announced just in the last few days here that there were going to be some training exercises with Russians in Belarus. How significant have you heard that training exercise is? Is it more posturing, or is it something that that we think could turn into something to where these troops could actually get involved in Ukraine?
Look, I probably could tell you that the war against Ukraine, it started as a training. With 200,000 troops, gathered by northern and eastern part of Ukraine, and it was posed as a training. That is a yearly training. So we had our share of these trainings. They called, Zapad, Western training exercises. I'm not sure actually how much Russia now could devote troops for training exercises because of its military activity, around Ukraine and in Ukraine. Therefore, I would not expect them to be significant. But on the other hand, we have to take these things seriously, because it's a very easy cover-up. Additionally, what I would like to mention is that there is a new actor in Belarus, which cannot go overseen, is China. And actually, Lukashenko has been actively inviting Chinese companies, political activity, even military activity, come on a couple of months back in Belarus. So there is a chance that we are seeing not just an extension of what we talked of Russian military area into Belarus, but of Chinese, economic and political, and even possibly military in the future interest into European continent via Belarus.
Yeah. Let me ask you this in my last few seconds. What can break Lukashenko away from Russia? Is there anything that can sever that relationship?
Well, sir, I can tell you that there is definitely one thing that can break Lukashenko. That's Ukraine's victory in the war.
Thank you.
Recognize our State Department representative, Ms. Rand.
Thank you very much, and thanks to all three of you for your really moving testimonies. Mr. Foreign Minister, nice to see you again. I have two quick questions. Both of you mentioned more sanctions, and we talked a little bit about sanctions invasion, but on the individual sanctions, like the global Magnitsky sanctions, to get at the individuals who are either involved in the human rights abuses or involved in some of the military activities, can you, all three of you, assess, we've talked a little bit about the delegitimization policies, right, to move these folks outside and to shun them. Is that working, the sort of individually named sanctions, either for human rights abuses or other activities? How are those working? Is it more sanctions we need or just better strategy around the sanctions? That's the first question.
So I will start with providing you with one good example how sanctions can work. Of course, when we are talking about Putin, Lukashenko, Lvova, Belova, and others, so top officials, sanctions are not so efficient because these people just can't stop the deportation and re-education of children because this is the state policy. But when we are talking about medium representatives, like, for example, mayors of some cities in Belarus, who are also involved in the process of organizing this military patriotic re-education of Ukrainian children in Belarus. So it works. In 2023, Regional Center for Human Rights prepared a sanction proposal for the mayor of Novopolotsk. This is the city in Belarus. In this city, there were several groups of Ukrainian children who were not just subjected to some rehabilitation in hospitals, but they were in Belarusian schools. Some of them were sent temporarily to Belarusian families. Also, the mayor of Novopolotsk organized for representatives of foreign countries, also inviting representatives of the European Union to visit Novopolotsk in order to legitimize this policy of re-education. So we proposed him. The European Union included him into its sanction list, and in 2024, we didn't document Ukrainian children in Novopolotsk. So it works. Also, it works when these sanctions are only the so-called yellow card for these people, and other institutions started preparing something against them. For example, we firstly submitted Svetlana Mayboroda. This is a representative from Mariupol who was involved in the deportation of Ukrainian children. She was included to many sanctions lists, not only in the European Union, but also in the United Kingdom, in Canada. And then the procedure started, criminal procedure started against her. And now this woman is also not working in the field of sending Ukrainian children, especially orphans and children deprived of parental care, to Russia or to Belarus. So it is efficient, but what we need, of course, we need more sanctions, not only against individuals, but also against organizations, not like business organizations, but also, for example, military patriotic movements, UNARMIA, it is already sanctioned in the United States, but we have also other organizations like Center Warrior, established thanks for Putin and his money. Also, we have another organization, People Friendship Academy Akhmat, established thanks for Ramzan Kadyrov. So we need also include these organizations into the sanctions list. And we need to harmonize sanctions between different states, because it is just not normal when some people are already included into the sanction list of the European Union, then they have some time in order just to transfer their money to some other jurisdictions to hide them, and then this jurisdiction started the process, another process, just to include these people with the same evidence to their sanction list. So we should harmonize. Maybe we need some unified database in order to do it, maybe some additional agreements, but when these processes are not harmonized, they are not so efficient, and unfortunately people who are really involved in the deportation and other crimes against Ukrainian children, for them these sanctions are just nothing.
So, I just can give some examples of how sanctions really works. And sanctions stopped production of sites for T-90 tanks for more than 3 months in summer of 2024. I think we can save a lot of lives of Ukrainian troops for that stopping period. Since November 2023, the estimated profitability of some companies produced by state military industrial complex of Belarus fallen to 5%. When we push just some more, we can do like 0 or minus 5%, and it's not the reason to produce more of that production. The price of Belarus machinery delivery to any part of the world has increased 3 times in 4 years. At the same time, Belarus holding is the main source for the dictator Lukashenka, from where he stole more than $5 billion for 70 years. And right now, we sanctioned it, Belarus holding, and we need to sanction trade house Belarus, which are based in Moscow, and after that we can find stolen money and we can help Belarusian democratic forces to win that game. So, according to the Belarusian Foreign Ministry, the amount of losses from the 14th package of the European Union sanctions amounted to about 2.5 billion of US dollars. So I think it's a really good number. And for that reason, we need more sanctions, because Lukashenko's regime is like, it's not like in a democratic state when we need to do a lot of procedures, when we need to do a lot of things to change the scheme or something like that. In the Belarus right now, it's an authoritarian state, and Lukashenko can just say 2 words and all the machine works to change the structure, change the scheme of the sanction evasion, and so on. For that reason, we need to provide more sanctions and more faster. Thank you.
I'm out of time. I just wanted to thank the government of Lithuania for hosting the Belarusian opposition. We haven't talked about that, but that's an incredible service you're doing to democracy in Belarus, and if there's anything we can do to help.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize the gentleman who represents the second best barbecue city in America, Kansas City, Mr. Cleaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, this is a complex issue, probably not as complex to people, and one of them would like to see Lukashenko out of the way. But I'm having, you know, I mean, you know, Belarus, most of the people in Belarus speak Russian, is that? Yes?
There is a process of de-Belarusian, you can call it that, forced Russian language teaching that basically forces people to abandon their mother tongue.
Which means they would not be able to join, well, there's probably a number of reasons that they can't join NATO. But has there been a spirit of, even if it was underground, to connect with and become a member of NATO?
If I may, look, there is like any questions of Belarusian joining transatlantic alliance or European Union are in the future. Today, we can acknowledge a difference in spirit. There are very few countries with the captured people, and it's a captured people country, where you would see 600,000 people walking out in the street because the election was stolen and asking for dignity and democracy being restored. That very rarely happens. You would see a protest of, tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 is enormous. Belarusians went en masse, 600,000 people, and that has to be acknowledged. The way that I addressed my parliament, usually when they would ask, how can we, build up pressure on Lukashenko and other things, I said we have to keep the spirit of freedom alive because it's there. It's repressed. it's horribly, horribly, horribly repressed. There are, what, 1,500, 1,900 political prisoners currently in prisons. So that's, that sends a message as how free are you to go out now? But those 600,000 people are still there. And they still believe in democracy. They still believe in their dignity that has been stolen. And we have to support that today for any other questions to be answered in the future.
Thank you. I'm also very concerned. I mean, in the old Soviet Union, I'm assuming that it was just simply a part of Russia, territory. And so now, if Russian, well, I guess it was Belarusian land that Russia used, I guess, prior to the attack into the Ukraine. But is there any suggestion, even mildly, that Russian troops are being, or let's say, Belarusian troops integrated into Russian units? I mean, Russia's lost. I mean, nobody knows the number of troops they've lost, and so they're trying to get a land army. I guess now we're looking at North Korean troops. So I'm just wondering if there are Belarusians who would have any desire to fight with the Russians.
So right now we have a military unit in Ukraine, Belarusian Democratic Military Unit in Ukraine, Polk Krynovska. And right now we know we just collect data from the military services of Lukashenko's regime. And we know that after war starts in 2022, a lot of Lukashenko's troops changed their mind. They don't want to participate in that crime war. They don't want to die in Ukraine, and they want to do something like connected with the war in the Ukraine. But we have a few military units in Belarus which just want to participate in that war. It's like Gubopik, it's like the most terrifying unit in Belarus, which are tortured a lot of Belarusians. Belarusian OMON, it's like a special militia unit in Belarus, and so on. And we know that the mostly Belarusian officers of the army, of the police, like militia in Belarus, do not want to participate in war in Ukraine. They don't want to go to the Ukraine.
Nor would they want to be a part of the collective security treaty organization that have been set up that's close?
They are part of a treaty. They are part of a treaty, but as far as we know, and as far as we are being briefed by our services, is that they are resisting until now successfully any pressures by Russians to join in active military activity in Ukraine. There have been worries that at this stage that Belarusian troops might join in the activities, especially if Russia, feels pressures. But I understand that Ukrainian military also serves as some sort of a deterrent. That currently Belarus is not being attacked by Ukraine. There are no targets that are being, hit in Belarus. But that message has been sent to Belarusian authorities that if you would decide to join in together with Russians actively fighting in Ukraine with your troops, your military targets would become targets for Ukrainian weapons. And this is probably what works as some sort of deterrent until now. We are not sure whether that will remain so. And therefore Ukrainians and others in the region, we have to keep being vigilant with whether that happens.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
May I just briefly add to this, because unfortunately the part of this resistance not to participate actively on the field in Ukraine with armed forces, the part of this resistance is the policy of indoctrination of Ukrainian children by Belarusian regime. This is, you know, some point where Lukashenko may play, talking to Putin, that, oh, I am participating in these activities, Ukrainian children are welcomed in Belarus in order to be militarized and re-educated. We are supporting this policy, but we are not ready to support you actively by our military troops. Unfortunately, in this case, Ukrainian children are just instrumentalized by Lukashenko regime for another time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cleaver. Mr. Landsbergis, you said that if Ukraine wins over Russia, that would be a problem for Lukashenko. Why do you say that?
Well, sir, we in Lithuania see war in Ukraine as a zero-sum game. If Ukraine is stronger, if it's able to push Russia out, that means that Russia gets weaker. If it gets weaker, its grasp, a geopolitical grasp, political grasp on so many countries in the region, on the captive nations, becomes weaker.
Well, I understand that. It becomes weaker. I don't know that it becomes weaker, that Lukashenko gets stronger, because he's pretty weak when he capitulates to Putin, which is what he did. I mean, he capitulated without a war, but he saw what would happen, and Putin would have taken over Belarus.
But sir, he clings on his partnership with Putin.
Right.
Putin serves him as a geopolitical bodyguard.
Yeah.
And if Putin is no longer there, you know, too busy solving his own problems, this is where Belarus has a chance. Belarusian people have a chance. And obviously it's up to them how to realize that chance. You know, I wouldn't name the ways, but I'm thinking that they're pretty clear what they can do. But now we're seeing Russia, its military so close, supporting the regime in Belarus. This is what chokes the freedom out of people.
Well, it's a difficult situation. Resolution is going to be, I mean, Lukashenko wants to be Lukashenko, and he wants to stay in power. Putin wants to be Peter the Great. And that's a whole bigger picture with his ego and life after death and immortality. I don't think Lukashenko thinks of mortality. Lukashenko thinks about today and his grasp on power and wants to keep it. There's a different perspectives, I guess. And Ms. Revshevska, we know that the children, how do you know that they're orphaned? Did they come from an orphanage, or you just assumed they did?
So, you know, the most maybe horrific thing that Russians as well as Belarusians, they are not even trying to hide all details about these children. Sometimes we even found in open sources names and surnames of these children. Then we verified their data with Ukrainian database Children of War, and we found that these children were not only orphans or children deprived of parental care, but they were looked for as children deported by Russia. So they are just publishing everything because they would like to maybe to legitimize their actions by this way. And also, of course, they are even identifying the number of boarding school from which these children were taken. Sometimes like Ambrosiivka boarding school number 5. So we know all the details, and we are persuaded that these children are orphans. And of course, this is information from open sources, but we also had other closed source of information with all relevant data in order to verify our assumptions.
Orphaned because of their parents died before the war and they were in an orphanage, or the parents died when the Russians invaded?
There are both types.
Both.
So like children who were before the large-scale invasion in these boarding institutions, but also there are some children, in particular from Mariupol, who lost their parents, and this is the most difficult situation because these children were not previously in the unified database of Ukraine. So unfortunately, we don't know any personal information about these children, about their blood relatives, and so on and so forth. That is why it is really difficult to identify these children and also to return them back to Ukraine. And one boy from Mariupol, he was firstly taken to Belarus to this re-education camp, and then unfortunately he was not returned to occupied territory. We just don't know his fate. Maybe he was taken to Russia to forcible adoption.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what the story is, whether the Belarusian authorities want these young people to be Belarusian and be there and have a home in Belarus, or if they want them to be part of the military. And if they become part of the military, they very likely could die in battle, and then they would lose them. And whether they're more valuable alive to Belarus is showing, you know, the youth and what they've done for them, or if they're more powerful being a part of the military. I don't know which their priority is. Do you have any idea what their priority would be, to send them to battle, or would they want to keep them in Belarus to keep them alive?
So, as I have already mentioned, these children, they are not detained in Belarus. That is why they are not imposed by Belarusian citizenship. They are not becoming Belarusian citizens, and so on and so forth. Of course, we have documented cases where Belarusian representatives, they expressed their will that these children in future will enter Belarusian universities and then will live in Belarus. And unfortunately, some children publicly to Belarusian media testified that, oh, maybe in future we would like to live in Belarus, because they were just indoctrinated, they were just brainwashed. But the main goal here is just to assist Russia in achieving this goal to militarize Ukrainian children and to turn them into Russian soldiers, not Belarusians, because as I have already mentioned and highlighted, that Belarus is not willing actively participate in this war with their troops. That is why they are just preparing from Ukrainian children Russian soldiers, in order that Russia in future will use these children as cannon fodder against their proper nation.
Yeah, that's what I've read, that it's possibly what they would occur, and they're indoctrinating them, and they would be fodder, cannon fodder, and they would go and fight Ukrainians, and that they need bodies.
And here I would like also to highlight that unfortunately we had already cases where children from occupied Crimea and Donetsk and Luhansk regions, so-called DPR and LPR, it was before the full-scale invasion, so these children were also militarized with this UNARMIA movement, and then these children participated in special military operation. Some children died because they were killed, and other children, they finished, so they were demobilized. And now these children, ex-children, Russian soldiers already, they are training Ukrainian children from newly occupied territories. And this is really dangerous tendency, because the Russian Federation is trying to use already brainwashed children from Ukraine against children who are from newly occupied territories who have this Ukrainian identity. And they are just trying to demonstrate them, oh, please join these all military patriotic movements and military camps, be like us, because if no, you will be bullied, you will be like your brothers, other Ukrainian ex-children, they will do something against you. So this is this use of Ukrainian children each against each other, this is very dangerous, unfortunately.
Thank you. Mr. Kleber, do you have anything else? If not, did any of the three of y'all want something else to offer to us? Final closing statement.
No, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Today we have a really difficult situation because we have a full-scale invasion in the center of Europe. And my state, because of Lukashenka, took participate in that criminal war. Right now, Belarus people can't to protest on the streets. Belarus people can't to write anything in the social media because in few days the policemen comes to the people. And right now we need to fight against Lukashenko, and we are asking on the whole democratic world to help Belarusian democratic forces to fight against Lukashenko regime. We asking for help and we asking for support. Thanks a lot for your attention. Long live Belarus.
Let me ask you this question. I know there's some American military forces in eastern Lithuania, kind of north of Vilnius, I think, and right near the Russian border. And there's some Russian forts just across the way. Are those manned by Belarusians or by Russians these days?
So right now we don't have any information that Lukashenko's regime placed Belarusian army or Russian troops on the border with Lithuania. But in the same time, we know that Putin don't want to stop in the Ukraine. Putin prepare the big battle in 2025, 2026, 2028. And we know that right now Putin sponsorized a lot of building or a lot of new plants, manufacturers in Belarus to produce the artillery shells, rockets for the MLRS Grad and so on. And right now we just collect information about new plant in Belarus that Chinese engineers helps to build, and that plant should to produce more than 10,000 rockets, 122 millimeters in a month. It's like a big number of the shells, and we know that Putin don't want to stop in the Ukraine, and for that reason we need to fight against Lukashenko. For that reason we need to fight against Putin.
Yeah, I got you. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Just following up, is there tension, visible tension? I guess maybe you can't see tension, you have to feel it, but tension between Poland and Belarus?
Well, sir, there is a tension throughout the region. When you have neighbors like Russia or Belarus, there's always tension.
Yeah, that's a bad neighborhood, but
So, but getting into specifics, I probably could mention that there has been a long-standing row between Belarus and Poland when it comes to a imprisoned head of Polish minority in Belarus. And Poland was actively seeking his release out of prison and possibly out of country, and it was denied. So, but it's just one of the examples. I mean, when you have nuclear arms placed, closer to your border, where there's, supposed to be none, it provides tension.
Let me ask you one other question. You're the foreign minister, but you know about Russian television, which Putin controls, putting the nude pictures of the president-to-be's wife on television. Where's the psychology of that? Is that just to say, hey, we've got other pictures and be careful and we'll use them? Or is that just, I mean, it's just bizarre. What kind of thinking was behind that, do you think?
I think the intention, but that's, one has to try to look into the mind of a person, right? Because there is a person who's playing some sort of a game. So I would assume that it's a game of humiliation.
Just humiliate, not blackmail, more humiliation.
No, I don't think that this would be the case. I think that it's humiliation. This has been done in the past with with quite a lot of other people, let's say, who Putin wants to either intimidate or humiliate. So it could be what was previously the Russian opposition. That was a usual Friday evening for them to find themselves on national TV. Kind of to make a joke or something like that.
Yeah, it was pretty weird.
Yeah.
Think he'll ever go to Mar-a-Lago?
Sorry?
Putin. Think he has plans to go to Mar-a-Lago?
If I may, sir, my point is, and coming back to your previous question, I think when we talked about Lukashenko and what can weaken him, I think we're given a historic chance. with what is happening in Ukraine. And I really do hope that we won't miss it. Because we're on a crossroad. It's either we make Ukraine stronger for whatever comes, for battlefield, for negotiations, but just stronger, way, way stronger than it is now. And that solves so many things in the region. That solves, NATO's eastern flank, that solves Belarus, that solves Moldova, that solves Romania's election, where Russia is now actively trying to influence them. It solves South Caucasus, Georgia, Armenia. I mean, it basically, there is a point which connects to so many other points. And if we don't solve it, if we don't make Ukraine stronger, then we'll have to return to this chamber and talk about way bigger problems in Belarus, in Georgia, in Moldova, in Lithuania. Who knows where it will stop. And I really do hope that those with power will be able to use it.
Thank you, sir. I can assure you, you have my support. Ukraine does, and I understand your position, and it's exactly right. And it would be a terrible mistake to go back to just acquiescing to Putin, letting him think he won, and basically letting him win. And then he won't stop there. It'll be Estonia, and then Lithuania, and Latvia, and he's got his eyes on the
Exactly.
Balkan countries as well, and there's no stopping him. And bad situation. Thank you all for your testimony and your time. Appreciate
Thank you
it
so
very
much, sir.
And with that, this is adjourned. Pop.
Yes. Okay.